Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Hi, Don.
Hi, Tricia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. And thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for being here. Today we have Don Sawyer. He's the author of The Burning Gem. Is this an adult fantasy or YA fantasy?
Yeah, it's adult fantasy. I hope it has some crossover, but it's definitely an adult fantasy, and it's the first adult fiction I've done. I've done adult nonfiction, but this was really fun to do, although it took me forever. And so it's part of a series called the Soul Catchers series, and so the sequel, which is the Tunnels of Buddha, set under the Buddha Castle in Budapest, is due out in 2025, and then I'm just beginning to think about a third one.
Okay, so take me back to the beginning. What's the origin of the story? What's the premise? Who are the characters? Tell me about the world. I want to know everything.
Okay, I want to know everything. Sure. Well, it revolves around, not surprisingly, a burning gem, but the gem is made by a machine that looks something like an old-time wood camera, box camera. But rather than take your picture, it actually crystallizes a portion of your soul. And so literally your soul, and these are incredibly magnificent gems, beautiful, but they're all different colors. And we know right from the beginning that they serve to enhance your character, who you are. The former president of Uruguay, Pepe, he once said, power doesn't corrupt, power simply reveals your true personality. And that's kind of what these gems do. They just show who. And so she is in this loveless marriage with a philandering husband, and she's like a legal secretary and basically ignored. So she's pretty desperate when this gem maker shows up on her doorstep. And so when he makes her this incredible gem, she's sort of elevated, and she realizes this is her chance to get the hell out of there. And he gives her this very cryptic clue on how to find him, which involves, as it turns out, going through the subways of New York to find this subway station that's been closed for 60 years. And she does finally track down the gem maker, who his contract prohibits him from touching another person or from giving his name to another person. And it turns out he's 110 years old, and he's just kind of been frozen in this sort of desperate sadness. And so she almost literally kicks down the door, and then together they find, and he's attached to this sort of utopian community that was built by extraordinary people, some magicians, if you will, what have you, shapeshifters, things, who found this abandoned subway station, actually subway terminal, that was built in the 1870s. And so it's larger than Grand Central Station. But the odd thing about this is it's true that this guy tried to build a subway in the 1870s. And he did build this massive underground station terminal, but then he went broke, and so it's been largely forgotten. But anyway, in my story, people come to escape from above ground, and they transform it into this sort of utopian syndicate community with hundreds of people from all over the world who bring special skills and so forth. And so from that point, they realize that he is part of a cabal that uses these gems, among other things, to spread evil across the world. In particular, the conviction that certain people are meant to rule and other people are meant to be their subjects. And so it's interesting in that I'm drawing on some of Nietzsche's ideas of the Superman, but also of the beyond good and evil, which I think those ideas are some of the most insidious that we all have to wrestle with. And this idea that there's some people that, by virtue of some special quality, are intended to rule, and the rest of us are just intended to shut up and do what we're told. So I think that's an idea I really want to encounter, and they do. They counter it, and they use their skills, and it becomes a pretty exciting, I think, a pretty exciting story as they try to track down the leader of this cabal, and it takes them to the ruined bars of Budapest, and to a confrontation with the master in his offices in London. It was fun to write.
It does sound fun. Have you been to all these places that you're writing about?
I mean, Budapest in particular, when we were there, I was just struck by it. And to be honest with you, I actually took off some of my travel to money to Budapest as a writing expense, because I said, man, I'm gonna use this place in a book, and I did. But this I mean, it's been overrun. Poor old Hungary, it's been overrun by every horde known to man, starting from Genghis, Kublai Khan on, and it was occupied for many years, and first, by the Ottoman Turks, and then it was occupied by the Germans brutally, and then the communists took over. It's just been one thing after another, So, but it still has this kind of gloomy but fascinating, slightly decrepit kind of magical feel to it. And there's one extended scene set in a ruin bar, and the ruin bars are these old mansions that were abandoned, mainly by wealthy Jewish families in World War II, even earlier than that, because of the pogroms there. And they just stood there because under the communist regime, they couldn't rebuild them and really had no use for them. So they just kind of started to decay. But then in like the 80s and 90s, young people said, hey, this is ridiculous. So they took them over and they converted them into these wild bars. Like one we went into had a lotta in the huge middle of the living room with a parlor with people sitting in it, and there was music playing, and the old rooms with crumbling plaster had,
wow,
just wild and kind of dark. And so anyway, it was those places stay with you. I think as a writer, if you haven't been there, it's pretty tough. But if you have been, you can really bring these places alive. And in London, I used the Smithfield Market area, which again always hit me as kind of a spooky place. It's where they used to publicly execute, usually through the most, they would hang and disembowel and quarter in that area. And it's also the main meat packing section of London. It's the only place when I was working in Africa a lot, it was the only place they would sell beer at 8 o'clock in the morning. So sometimes we'd get in and we say, all right, let's go over to Smithfield, because they was open for the meat packers in the area. Oh yeah, so anyway, all that's fun.
Yeah, I get inspired when I travel too, so that's kind of neat. So did the travel come first or the book come first, or you?
In this case, the travel
okay
first. And in fact, the genesis of the book itself was a bit odd, because I was working with a writers group. We were living in Fairhope, Alabama at the time, and I was working with a really neat group of writers, and I had to come up with something, and so I worked in a lot of Aboriginal communities in Canada, and I had long heard the story about the photographers at the turn of the 19th century who tried to record the sort of fading native lifestyle, and many of the native people were really reluctant to have their pictures taken because they feared that they would take their souls.
Right, I've heard that before.
Yeah, and apparently it's true. Also in Africa, the same thing.
Right.
And when you think about it, there's something to it. Like, if you have this picture, it's like it freezes you in time, right? It takes kind of a part of you, and this is who you are. Even though you've moved on, this frozen little image of you remains. And so I was fascinated by that. And so I said, well, what if there really was a machine that took out a portion of your soul. And what would that do? And how could it be used for both good and evil? And so that was sort of the beginning of it. And um, I had a lot of fun with it, and I really enjoyed the whole idea. I've always been fascinated with deserted subways. Neil Gaiman's books, he has one where a lot of it's set in abandoned London railway station. I was like, wow, how spooky is this? And so I started to do some research, and damn, here's this station that's been abandoned since like 1947. And there's a line underneath, about 4 levels down, that hasn't run since Roosevelt's time.
Oh, wow.
And so I joined the two. So there's this sort of invisible train that connects with this lost utopian community way all underneath the subway. And of course, to get there, she has to walk through the subway, terrified of rats, and so I know. So
I got chills.
I know that I think we all did. But anyway, and then of course there are people who live down there. Anyway, so it was fun to do, and I had not done. I've always been a fan of fantasy. Of course, as a kid, the Lord of the Rings kind of helped me escape a pretty sterile suburban life, and so you realize, boy, what can writing do? What you really can transport people to another world. You can create that world. So this was a lot of fun doing it.
It sounds like a lot of fun. So what is the main character's name?
The main character is Barbara,
Barbara, okay.
and she's the woman. She's got red hair, and she's caught in this sort of loveless marriage, obviously far brighter than her husband, who's this kind of not only is he philandering, but he's just greedy and controlling, a lawyer who just sort of flattered her and picked her up and married her and then sort of discarded her. And so, as I say, she's sort of desperate to escape this wreck of a marriage. And then Zoltan, who shows up, who's this gem maker. And so he convinces her to buy this gem that he'll make for $50,000. And of course, he goes berserk and says, you're being taken. But she senses there's something special about this guy, and it's real. And so the book opens with him trying to make this gem, and of course she's kind of fidgety and says, "Please, madam, this is not a picture. I'm crystallizing your soul. Just sit down." Anyway, so the two of them are these kind of lost souls who come together, and like an atomic, they sort of create a lot of fission, and the two of them become quite a force to contend with.
Does she ever learn why he contacts her specially? Is there something special about her?
There's constant speculation, because she said, obviously there's a mistake. Why would you come to me? He said, I'm just told where to go. I said, but they don't make mistakes. She said, they must have wanted my husband. And he said, no, they wanted you. It was very specific. And so what we learn is that she has some pretty special powers herself. I mean, she sort of jokes around that she's an Aries and this fire image and all this, but it turns out that she really does have this sort of fire inside of her. And it turns out also quite extraordinary empathic capacities that, again, this gem enhances. And so as the book moves on, she becomes an empath, as well as developing, using her gem powers to protect, and in some cases even to attack. But she can also start to not only feel other people's emotions, but feed emotions to them. So at one confrontation, she's able to feel the sadness of the men, and she turns that to them so they can start to feel compassion. So this empathic capacity becomes sort of central to the plot as well.
Neat. And so is this a physical gem? Like it's a actual physical gem that's like a mirror or like a concentration of her soul, and so she can keep it with her, I'm assuming, or does the other guy get it?
No, in fact, that's part of the story. Once she feels the power of it, and it's just gorgeous, magnificent, and it's red, but there's like other elements too. There's yellow streaks, and there's a black diamond with a tiny white pearl in the middle of that, and it's just, you know, all like there's 1,000 facets on it, and so she's terrified that she'll lose it, and he says, well, you can put it in a chain. She said, no, I want a chain that can't be broken. I never want this off my neck. And so he says, well, I do know someone who makes chains like that, but they're very difficult to find. And so she's one of the artisans that live in this underground community called the market. And that's when he gives her this cryptic clue as to how to find him and the market. And nobody's ever figured that out before, but she does. Well, only one or two have. And then she finds him. He violates all the terms of his contract, and then he takes her to the jeweler who makes this incredible chain that's absolutely unbreakable, made from metals that are still somewhat theoretical, but they figured out they're so hard. And a lot of the stuff I think urban fantasy is best when it's rooted in, as much as you can, fact. And so I did a lot of research on metallurgy, and it's really quite fascinating. But then she also radiates it, and she puts the radiations in tune with Barbara's body vibration. So she can touch the chain and nothing happens, but somebody else touches it, they get radiation poisoning. So this again becomes an issue later in the book. So yeah, it's very much real. And then she also learns to actually use the gem to enhance powers and project her powers.
Okay. That sounds really neat.
Other gyms too. There's lots of other gyms out there. And
right.
Some of them.
Well, it sounds like her finding him in this community may have been a test and a hurdle, right? Like they had to know if she was really dedicated enough to find them, maybe.
Yeah, there's some, I mean, that's what, you know, I think he, you know, whether it was she actually accuses him of that. You just wanted to see if I could do it. And he said, well, in part because what you're getting into here, you don't have any idea of the seriousness of it. You know, you're basically severing any ties with your past life. And so it was kind of a test. Excuse me. And in fact, she says, well, I guess I passed, but the problem was that anyway, I won't go into the detail.
No, don't spoil anything for us.
He says, oh, you passed with an A-, and she's really angry. What are you talking about? Figured this all out. I walked in, and he says, okay, A+. But yeah, so you're right. It is kind of a test, and a test of her, and she makes a decision, right? I mean, a big decision.
Right.
And her desperation at getting out of this, not just a loveless marriage, but this kind of, as I say, this kind of sterile suburban life, you know, which is so unsatisfying to her. One, by the way, which I kind of grew up with myself. So I guess, like you say, we draw on what we know, right?
Right. So what's next for the series? Does this character continue? What's the next quest?
Like in the sequel is scheduled for May 2025. It's going to be called The Tunnels of Buddha, and much of it's going to occur underneath. There is in fact this incredible maze of tunnels and caves underneath Budapest, in particular underneath the Castle of Buddha. It goes on for miles. Some people say they've never been fully explored. And the belief is they found evidence that Neanderthals lived there. So this goes like, you know, we're talking back now thousands of years that it's been inhabited. Really spooky. And this is where the evil, the central evil, evil central is located in something called the Company. And it turns out that it's this giant organization supported with a lot of money, whose entire purpose is to force people into believing these ideas of a group of intended rulers and intended slaves, and to convince people of their and also to enhance and to promote tribalism, to try to find ways of dividing people. So, even, and it's an idea that I really do feel strongly about, that at a time when as a species we're facing, extinction, can't we do better than getting, fighting amongst ourselves? Let's find our common humanity. And in fact, the group that forms is representatives of a variety of different cultures as they combat this really nefarious group of just evil doers but they're also very sophisticated. They're working with the most advanced technologies in this underground bunker, huge underground bunker. And so that's where we're going with the second book.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And how do you envision the series? How many books do you think they're going to be? Or is this one you could write forever?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, the second one will sort of complete. In fact, I have to confess, I actually wrote it as a single book, but as you know, so not a lot of folks are interested in a 195,000 word novel from a relatively unknown writer. So I broke it into two, and worked with a wonderful editor who helped me kind of make the transition. So, but I definitely, there's a third now. I can see that now for sure. And so there's a third one that I'm working on right now, sort of the final showdown. Of course, evil's so darn hard to get rid of, right? It is, man, they're like whack-a-mole. You get one down. So yeah, I could go on indefinitely, but the third one is going to be sort of and I think that's where I'll end the series. But we'll see.
A trilogy is always good.
That's what
and yes, I think 195,000 words would have been too much for one book. So yeah, I think that was the right call in there.
But and I mean, I realize that I'm not in the same league as J.K. Rowling, but those books were like 700 pages.
That's true.
And so I thought, wow, I can do, but no, it was the right call. In fact, I had tried getting the larger book published, and I'd gone, the usual route with representatives and publishers, and had everybody wrote back, it's too long. And as soon as I broke it into two and submitted, I had two published almost immediately showing interest.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
well,
so
congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah, like I said, I think I've been kind of somewhat spoiled. I mean, this is about my, I don't know, 13th or 14th book, and I've had, two of them are Canadian bestsellers, and so I kind of just thought, well, I'll send it out, somebody will publish it, and Bob's your uncle. It didn't turn out. And this is the first American publisher I've had, so just a lot of differences.
Okay, fun. And you talked about your earlier works were all nonfiction works, correct?
No, my first book was about teaching in Newfoundland as a young couple back in the 70s, and that was the first book I said I don't know how to write, and my friend who was a poet of all things, oh yeah, man, this is a great story, you got to tell this story. So that was a work of nonfiction that did very, very well, and was used in teacher training programs across the country, which was really gratifying. But then I've done children's books. I've done 2 YA novels that I'm really, really proud of. I've done a series of quick reads, which are low vocab, high interest for adult readers. And I really enjoyed doing those, really enjoyed it. And because I was teaching adults English, and so there was just no material out there. So I figured, well, I guess I better write it. And that's been really, really successful. So yeah, all kinds of things.
Well, it sounds like you're a lifelong author then, writer.
Yeah, although I mean, I think I'm an educator who writes more than an author who teaches. The same guy, a friend of mine, said that what he wanted on his tombstone was at least he got a book out of it. And I think that's kind of like, I think most of the stuff I write kind of stems from my experiences as a teacher in a let's say, like for an Aboriginal community, or, working with alienated young people, or, or maybe even stories I told my kids when they were young. I got a series of one called The Meanest Teacher in the World, which is a series of, so, you know, things that, and of course, as you well know, because you have a job as well, trying to find time to write when you're also, you know, raising kids and teaching full time is not easy.
No, it's not.
But now that I'm retired, I don't have any excuse.
Do you think that was your major jump from writing shorter pieces for young adults to writing like a big series, a fantasy series for adults?
I think you're onto it. You know, I had more time. It was more, you know, I didn't, and the story just kept going. And I didn't, like you said, I didn't have to, I only have, okay, I only have, you know, okay, I got Farish to bed and at 9:30, you know, I have to get up tomorrow and teach tomorrow at 8, so I can maybe get 2 hours in here, you know, and that sort of made you really intent on keeping it short. And I also like writing young adult. I think it, you know, it's more straightforward for the most part. Use a lot of I really like dialogue. You know, you don't have to burden it with you know, overly descriptive passages. It's a genre that I enjoy. I mean, the characters can be strong without being overly, you know, overwrought. So I think it's informed all of my writing to kind of keep it, you know, readable, entertaining, concise, good point of view, but not hitting over the head with it kind of. Anyway, I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
Fun. And is it written in this Burning Gem? Is it first person or is it third person?
Third person. And that's always a trick too. You know, to make sure that your point of view is reflective of the characters, and that my editor really helped me a lot with that. That was really, really helpful. And well, what is she thinking? You know, don't she just you know, she's got to react somehow. What is it? Okay.
And did you get feedback on how a female would react versus a male? Was that hard for you?
You know, I've had that. You know, I mean, of course, I've been married for 54 years, and I had 2 daughters. So I think which isn't to say that I have the same sensibilities as a woman, but I think I can write a female character pretty well. Having said that, and my young adult novel, Where the Rivers Meet, which is the protagonist is a young woman in high school who's just, you know, she's dealing with all kinds of issues in the community, and, you know, a shattered family, and this really repressive school. And when she finally breaks out of the school, the teacher confronts her, and she tries to grab her, and she hits him, she slugs him. And I can remember when I was doing a reading to a group of high school kids, the woman said, I don't think she would have hit him. She said, I think that's what a boy would do, but I don't think that's what a girl would do. She would just yank free. And they also said, you know, she was kind of on her own in trying to deal with all of these traumas. She said, we, as young women, we would have supported each other more and been more as a group. So I learned a lot. You know, I think, yeah, maybe they got a point. Yeah, you know, I'm certainly not, I mean, and that's the way I feel about a lot of these things. If you get it wrong, well, criticize me, you know, whether it's cultural or gender-based or whatever, and I can learn from that. When I wrote my second young adult novel, I actually had a young woman who was 15, I think, at the time, because that was what I was aging for, and she was my editor, and so she went through it with me. I mean, at one point, I think I had to had a girl putting on lipstick, and she went, "Oh my God, nobody puts on lipstick anymore." So, you know, okay. So yeah, that was really, and she would say, yeah, I don't think she would talk like that. So that was, you know, let's face it, I'm somewhat distant from that age group. So that really helped. That was good.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's great that you had those resources and took the time to do that and put that amount of energy into your books. And they can never be 100% perfect. You're always going to learn something after the fact. So.
Yeah. And I mean, when I wrote Where the Rivers Meet, which is set in a Native community, the young woman, her turnaround occurs when she meets this sort of kind of witchy woman. Everybody's kind of afraid of her, who lives on the other side of the river, whose name is Mrs. Schwartz. Isn't that a great name for a Native woman? We actually knew Mrs. Schwartz when we lived in Lytton. Long story. But anyway, she goes there and asks her for help, and And of course, well, what do you want my help for? Nobody pays attention to this anymore, but she takes her through a spirit quest and she comes out. And then, so anyway, the point I'm making is that particularly when I focused on the spirit quest, I knew this was sensitive material and I didn't want to presume. So fortunately, I had an elder friend who granted me like 4 or 5 hours of interviews, and I recorded them and asked her, because her aunt had been one of the last women to go through the quest. And she even sang me the song that her aunt had learned on her quest, which was quite beautiful. And so, I mean, I knew this was critical to be accurate, and what I got was not only this amazing material for the story, but 4 hours of recording nobody else had bothered to do, which of course I gave to the tribal council, and
that's
it's
really
still
neat.
being used, as a resource. So I so feel that when you're working in those kind of areas, you must research in the best possible way.
It's really neat that you could preserve that for them too.
And then I noticed it was being played on the radio.
Oh, wow.
Which was great. And
you can make a podcast out of that.
Yeah, you could. You could too. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
And she talked about, because she must have been 80 at the time. I mean, in British Columbia, the European intrusion really wasn't until late 17, early 1800s. So that culture and that continuity of that culture was still pretty intact.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Neat. Well, this is a question that I love to ask all my authors. And I think I want you to answer it about the Burning Gem, or maybe the series if you want. But someone coming in, what is your vision, or what do you want them to take away from the book? What's the overarching either feeling or idea that you want your readers to take away?
That even though we're made to feel impotent, we have, using bravery and courage and cooperation, we have the capacity to shape our world rather than simply inheriting it. And the protagonists in this are selfless and brave and collaborative, and in the process they create a community and a force that is transformative. And I think we all have the capacity to do that, working together.
That's neat. That's what I call magic. That's what my whole podcast is based on, because I always say I like to write characters that are figuring out what their own brand of magic is and bringing that to the world and sharing it with the world. So I love that thought. So thank you so much for being here, and tell everyone where we can find you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And my website is simply donsawyer.org.
Okay.
www.donsawyer.org. And if you look at Don Sawyer Books on Facebook, you can get. That's why I try to keep things more current. And I'd love to hear from people. And really, particularly, I'm interested in getting feedback. We all are. I think, as we're all we sit in our rooms and walk, type away. But what we really want to know is, how did it work once it got out on to the readers? And so I'd love to hear from readers. I think we all do. Great.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and we'll have you back next time when the next book comes out.
Great. I'm looking forward to that, Tricia. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.